United Nations Security Council, as you just heard, will be meeting this, in fact, in about an hour's time. For more on this, we'll speak to our UN correspondent, Sherwin Bryce-Pease, who's in New York. Sherwin, welcome to the program. I think maybe top of mind for me, this is a shameful reminder of the international community's almost criminal neglect of the crisis that has been, well, for years in that region.
Well, I think that statement, Tabiso, speaks to the structure we have right now in terms of the multilateral organ that is responsible for the maintenance of peace and security. You have an unreformed Security Council with 5 veto-wielding members, and in terms of their bilateral relationships with certain countries, their national priorities therefore influence the multilateral space that we are seeking to find solutions to intractable conflicts like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So the case in point here speaks to the role of the United States within the Security Council, its ability to veto Security Council action on this file. You correctly point out that this is the 3rd meeting in 6 days. It will be the first open format of these deliberations on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We've had 2 closed sessions where you don't get to see the various positions of countries. You will be able to see their positions today. And what is expected is that the United States will become increasingly isolated despite its veto defense of Israel here. I can also tell you, Tabiso, that the Secretary General will open the meeting. It will then be followed by his special envoy to the Middle East, the chief UN negotiator in that region, and then various foreign ministers, including the Chinese foreign minister, the Jordanian deputy prime minister, Egypt's foreign minister who is playing a big role in terms of mediation. You know that Israel basically controls one of the border entries into the Gaza Strip. Tunisia's foreign minister, the Russian Federation's deputy foreign minister. So certainly a lot of focus here on a higher level engagement. But whether we are going to see any results that can overcome Washington's opposition remains to be seen. But history shows us that it's very unlikely that the United States is going to allow this council to take action that casts aspersions on the role of Israel here.
Indeed. Now, there have been no substantive peace talks for more than a decade with regards to the conflicts in the Middle East. In fact, something that Donald Trump, when he was in office, spoke about the best deal, the deal of the century, which was an obvious sham because nothing has come out of it. And we hear now because a lot of people saying, well, it merely escalated the issues in the Middle East, and that's where we find ourselves today.
Yeah, and a lot of questions being asked about the U.S.'s role as the chief mediator. Can the United States, particularly vis-a-vis the role that the Trump administration played here in terms of really backing Israel to the hilt, what role can a Biden administration continue to play as an honest broker here? Because there's one side to this conflict that no longer necessarily views the United States role as an honest broker. But in addition to that, you know, it's important for the international community, people watching from South Africa, to understand the difficulties, the conflicts within the United States as it relates to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We've seen over this last weekend thousands of people take to the streets in places like New York, in places like Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, in solidarity with the Palestinian cause and urging the United States government to follow a different track here. And just to give you an example and a taste, Tabiso, of just how difficult this needle is to thread for Joe Biden are the divisions within the Democratic caucus in Congress, divisions within the Democratic Party, never mind the Republicans that are in opposition. Just within his own caucus, there are differing views on how to tackle this issue. Let's watch.
Moral clarity. That's what this moment calls for. Terrorists launch rockets at civilians, launch rockets from schools and hospitals, putting kids at risk. They use humans as shields. Hamas is a terrorist organization, sworn to wiping out the only Jewish state on earth. And the House of Representatives previously declared it shall be the policy of the United States to officially and publicly condemn Hamas for violating the international law of armed conflict by exploiting civilians. Democracies, on the other hand, act to limit civilian casualties, and do everything they can to defend their own citizens. Israel is a democracy, the only Jewish state in the world, and our friend and ally, and Israel has a right to defend her citizens.
This is our business because we are playing a role in it. And the United States must acknowledge its role in the injustice and human rights violations of Palestinians. This is not about both sides. This is about an imbalance of power. When I first got here in 2019, the Israeli government refused to admit 2 members of the United States Congress, Rashida Tlaib and Representative Ilhan Omar, into the country. Banned members of this very body because of who they were. Said it was a sign of weakness. We have historically said and committed to a role as an honest broker, then we must fulfill that role. That means we have to be honest with ourselves, with what our aid supports. We have to be honest and ask ourselves questions like why we are using our veto power in the UN Security Council.
So just a demonstration there, Thabiso, of the difficulty facing this administration. I can also confirm that the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Israel and Palestinian Affairs, essentially the highest ranking official that deals with this file in the State Department, Hadi Amir, is on the ground. What the US is now pushing for in a bilateral fashion is a de-escalation here. So whether you see that from the Council today or from their bilateral negotiations remains to be seen.
Interestingly, again on the grounds, on the streets, you mentioned earlier that there has been people coming out in the States as well, people saying, look, not in our name. A lot of Americans, the reaction I'm getting as the story unfolds, Americans are saying, but we fund Israel. Those are basically de facto Americans shooting down buildings where journalists are being housed. What is the mood of the normal citizen down there?
Well, like most things in the United States, there is a fine line that divides almost any political question that faces the United States, whether it be domestic or international. Remember, I just showed you 2 clips of 2 Democratic congresspeople on different sides of this argument. I haven't shown you any clips from the Republican side, vehemently in support of the Israeli cause here. The rocket fire, look, from those rockets flying over the heads of civilians in Israel does not help the Palestinian cause in a country like the United States, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. So it's a very, very fraught debate in the United States. Huge questions now being asked by people like Senator Bernie Sanders. You saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez there, really questioning the continuation of financial support, military support, military hardware support to the Israeli government here. But it's, it doesn't appear clear that policy is going to change in the short term. I will just tell you, I received a text message now from the ambassador to Ireland. Of course, Ireland, Thabiso, a member of the UN Security Council. She says, in my view, the Council needs to assume its collective responsibility. It is high time the Council speaks with one voice to call for a de-escalation and cessation of hostilities. I hope it will do so today. The meeting will take place in public with the world watching. Too many lives are being lost. Ireland calls on all parties to do everything in their power to protect civilians. Ambassador Byrne Nason of Ireland just sending us that a short time ago. So really some hope there from members of the Security Council. But on 2 occasions, this council has met just this week, Thabiso, and was unable to find consensus around a statement calling for a de-escalation. It's unclear if that will be able to happen today.
I mean, until the Middle East forced itself onto him this week, President Joe Biden was not planning to even comment, if I can put it that way. He's got China at the back of his mind, though bigger things, if I can put it that way, that he wants to deal with as far as American policy is concerned. It's going to be a big day for him as well to see whatever comes out of the United Nations Council, or the commentary from there from him.
Well, I think it's fair to say that this Sunday, Tabiso, China will be sidelined for at least a day. The focus very much on the Israeli-Palestinian file. And as you correctly pointed out earlier, he has been making calls. He hasn't spoken on the record, but we received readouts from the White House of his calls with the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, and Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'll just read you a little bit of that readout. President Biden updated President Abbas on U.S. diplomatic engagement on the ongoing conflict and stressed the need for Hamas to cease firing rockets into Israel. You're going to hear that from a number of speakers in the council today. They expressed their shared concern that innocent civilians, including children, have tragically lost their lives amidst the ongoing violence. Of course, the death toll for just children in Gaza has now exceeded 50 people. He also held a call with Netanyahu. The president reaffirmed his strong support for Israel's right to defend itself against rocket attacks from Hamas and other terrorist groups in Gaza. He condemned these indiscriminate attacks on towns and cities across Israel. The president updated the prime minister on the high-level engagements they're involved in the region, and also raised concerns about the safety and security of journalists, and reinforced the need to ensure their protection. Of course, a reference to that Israeli airstrike on the building, that high-rise in Gaza, a residential and an office building that held where the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, among other international media organizations, were housed.
How have the Associated Press, how can I say, delivered this story? I mean, those are their offices. AP is an American brand, so how have they told this particular story of their building being bombed by, well, Israelis de facto, like we're saying, the Americans? With the American support.
I mean, if this story, this incident didn't touch any journalists around the world, I mean, we all saw these dramatic images. Al Jazeera covered it live to see their building imploding after a number of airstrikes hitting it. Of course, the Israeli military giving them a heads up about an hour to vacate. You then saw dramatic video from inside that building of journalists packing up their gear and trying to get out before this imminent airstrike. The Associated Press president and CEO Gary Pruitt released this statement. I'll read some of it. We are shocked and horrified that the Israeli military would target and destroy the building housing AP's bureau and other organizations in Gaza. They have long known the location of our bureau and knew that journalists were there. We received a warning that the building was about to be hit, but Israel is justifying this strike to be so by saying that they believe that Hamas operated some of its facilities from this building. So AP is saying we are seeking information from the Israeli government and are engaged with the US State Department to learn more. They basically believe now the onus is on the Israeli Defense Force to prove what they were saying in terms of Hamas operations from that building. Of course, huge concern here that this was an attack on the media, a direct attack on media freedom by the Israeli government in this instance.
Sherwin Bryce-Pease, thank you very much indeed for chatting to us. Always interesting and always lovely having a conversation with you. Stay safe, brother. We'll catch up with you again a bit later as we look ahead to that United Nations Security Council meeting set to take place 4 p.m. South African time. We'll come back to you live when that happens. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.